I'd like to introduce Woody Kick, who I asked to moderate the panel and try and steer us towards some kind of direction here. Woody has been involved in a variety of environmental issues over the years, and I'll let him explain a little bit more about his own background. He's worked as a journalist, and he's worked in conjunction with different environmental groups, and I think he's someone who has a unique perspective and a valuable perspective when we try and discuss ways that we can work together better with the Native American community and ways that we can further the cause that we find in our common interests. So, Woody, I'll leave it up to you. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I was called kind of to moderate this panel. I really wasn't expecting it. I was planning on going for a walk today, and they called me last week and said the guy from Bozeman, a Native American Studies professor, couldn't make it. I was going to go up into the rattlesnake wilderness today. But I certainly appreciate the effort that goes into the whole wilderness movement, and the people who take time out of their lives to focus on the protection of wild lands. I read the Missoulian this morning. They're talking about protecting 1.19 million acres, maybe up to as many as 1.49 million acres. Bacchus says we'll compromise, do 1.29. Anyway, the reservation I come from, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, is approximately 1.5 million acres. When you get a chance, take a look on a map. They don't have one here, I don't think, or I'd show you. But 1.5 million acres is not a very big piece of land. How long does it take to drive through the reservation, tiny man? An hour? You can drive through it in about an hour, going at average speed in a car. About 50 miles wide. It's not very much land. When I went and talked to Montana Wilderness Association in 1986 in Bozeman, we were talking 6 million acres of land, which still isn't very much. So the amount has been reduced considerably, and it hasn't been reduced by anybody in this room. It's been reduced by some people who are setting policy in Washington, D.C., people who probably never go out into the wilderness areas, maybe people who don't value the wilderness areas, maybe people who don't have any spiritual values. I was a student here at the university in 1971. And about this time, in 1972, Russell Means passed through Missoula, gathering people for a caravan that was going to Washington, D.C., caravan called the Trail of Broken Treaties, that ultimately ended up taking over the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in D.C. and holding it for 8 days during the presidential elections of 1972 when Richard Nixon was in the White House. That was my first involvement as an activist, and I've been active since then. I came back to school in '87, got a degree, joined the system more or less. But my views haven't really changed that much in terms of what we perceive to be our Aboriginal rights. And there is a certain amount of common ground that we have with the environmental groups. There are certain places we come together and there are certain places we diverge, simply because a lot of our fight has to do with legalities with the United States government, which are basically our treaty rights, or human rights, or civil rights. And its wilderness equation, of course, comes within the purview of these rights. These gentlemen, these people sitting here, I am pretty much familiar with. Ladies and gentlemen. I worked for Lakota Times as a reporter a year ago and did a story on Joe Azure. And I mentioned these different battles just to show you that each tribe is a little bit different and yet the same. We're talking common ground. And he's fighting the Pegasus gold mine on Fort Belknap, where they know the cyanide leaching process is destroying the water. And I talked to the president of Pegasus Gold, and he said, bullshit. We had studies done by the state of Montana. There's nothing wrong with that water. His children don't have to swim there. He's not going to have to drink that water. Joe's children are. So that's the fight he's involved with, an organization called Red Thunder Incorporated. Mr. Robert Goldberg, who has been very active in promoting traditional values. I remember reading a press release he put out a few years ago in terms of a powwow he was sponsoring in Great Falls, and he mentioned an old man named Joe Bearwalker who fasted in the Sweetgrass Hills. And he talked about how after you fasted for a few days, you come to recognize the sacredness of water. Karen Atkinson, who's a tribal attorney for the Flathead tribe, and today because their reservation is such beautiful land and has been more or less inundated by non-natives, are trying to maintain their jurisdiction and are one of the few tribes that have created, or maybe the only tribe that I know of, that have created their own tribal spiritual wilderness in the Mission Mountains. Nicole Price, who is trying to protect the medicine wheel in Wyoming. The Forest Service wants to turn it into a tourist trap. It's a very sacred place. Floyd Heverrunner, who for years and years has battled the bureaucracy in trying to get the Blackfoot language implemented, because he is a fluent Blackfeet speaker, only one of a handful of Blackfeet speakers we have left as a result of the government and missionary policies that took us away from our language. And at this point I would like to say that I do not speak fluent Blackfeet, but I know enough Blackfeet to know that what he says is true, that when we talk about the earth and the sky and everything that's contained within it, there's no way you can say that in the English language. English is a very good practical language. I'm a writer, I know that, but there is something in the native languages that is missed in the English language. So each one of these panelists here have their own focus, and I emphasize that what you are here for, they have a commonality with you, because they are fighting for basically the same thing. So with that introduction, I would like to maybe start with Tiny Man and have him talk a little bit about the struggle that he is involved in. Feel free at any time to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions if you are not in agreement with the panelists or anything that I have said, because this is what this is for, is to create dialogue. And hopefully you will go home with some future references you can count upon, people you're going to meet here. That's one thing I've learned in 20 years of being an activist. I keep a Rolodex, people I haven't talked to in years, but they're still in my file, because one of these days down the road some issue might come up and I'm going to have to call that person. So these kind of gatherings are very valuable, to come across people that are working in the same areas, to know that you are not alone. Tiny Man?
Well, it's good to be here. I had a little trouble coming here, and seemed like we got here just about 10 minutes before everybody could get started here. But we traveled under very, like us native people, we never really worry about too much. We just go and do it. We come over here on tires like wires are showing, but we didn't have no flats, so we made it. And the spirit must be watching over us, or something's happened. Maybe good tires they made, huh? But I want to bring to your attention, first of all, the battle that I was brought into was not because of my own intentions. In the early 70s, I was presented through ceremony, through traditional transfer, one of our oldest religious responsibilities in one of our oldest religious societies, and that was the direct caretakers of our medicine woman. She puts up our medicine lodge, our Sundance. It's my responsibility to see that she's protected and to see that our Blackfoot culture and our religion is protected. For 15 years, I went through the ritual very well. I did what I was supposed to do without even thinking of what it meant. I was a Blackfoot. It didn't mean anything. I lived from year to year. I did it very well. My family presented me very well. Finally, one day, my grandmother was on a deathbed. At the same time, they brought this public meeting to our reservation and this EIS on the Badger to Medicine in this oil and gas exploration. I was preparing for, out of my grief, I was preparing for my destruction rite. I didn't want to live anymore because my elders were leaving. I had so much grief, I didn't care, nothing meant anything in this earth, in this life. So one of my friends come by curiosity, he went to that public meeting. He took this EIS, started going through it, and as he was reading the little bit of area that he was reading, the cultural area, he began to become very angry. So he comes up to me and he says, "You're the chief of one of our oldest religious societies. What are you going to do to protect this?" And he throws it in my lap. And he says, "Read this." So I read it. It's available to anybody that wants to read it that does not believe me. But in there was some information that we did not claim. As Blackfoot people, Blackfoot speaking people, after we read it, we said this does not apply to us Blackfoot speaking people. We are nobody's sacrificial lamb. We personally, as pre-Columbian culture people, will not accept any foreign religion, not even a native one, in place of our Blackfoot God. We made our stand that way. We had to. We look around us, all the protection that we have. We, as that Blackfoot people from the Badger, from that pocket of pre-Columbian culture, have no protection. No protection for religious practices. We're only allowed through the United States Constitution to believe that our religion will be destroyed. With that in mind, we start meeting. We start telling the Forest Service that, well, this is what we want to tell you about how we fit into the Badger. We had to explain to them our Blackfoot life and our religion in our mountains. When it come to asking about specific sites, we could not do that. I could not tell them my brother here went to that mountain, he put this there, and maybe he put his valuables there. Whatever it was, his medicine went there or there. The burials, whatever cultural significant site, I could not tell about. One fear was that they would come in and take it and bring it to some museum. Another fear was they would put a rope around it, put a road around it. They had no consideration to listen to what we had to say when we said we look at this area as an area approach, district approach. It is all sacred. This is the last place we have in Blackfoot country that we want to keep for the future generations, and not to mention the hidden agenda concerning pure water, our high quality, pure drinking water. Nobody ever talks about that. That we have concerns, not just sacred lands. Because of treaty, because of human rights, because of civil rights, whatever we have that we've inherited from our forefathers, it's our business. It is a Blackfoot issue. We decided with the United States of America on our lands, which lands we wanted to keep, what we wanted to trade for whatever it was, and what was handed to us through all of our inheritance to the Blackfoot-speaking person that got this inheritance. Our grandfathers in that language explained what we inherited. To this day, there has never been any kind of interpretation of the Blackfoot understanding of Treaty 1855, 1895, not to mention the Wheeler-Howard Act. We have our own understanding of the Wheeler-Howard Act. So we have a complete different understanding that has never been told to the world. Then here comes the environmentalists, here comes the wilderness people. We have to meet. We have to find some common ground to share our differences in how we think. I always say to these people, if you want to know anything, then come and ask us, and we will translate it to you. If you want to talk about environment, then you sit there and we'll tell you all about environment. And when you leave, you're going to know what the thunder looks like. You're going to know the thunder's name. You're going to know the thunder's purpose in this environmental world. You're going to know the wind. You're going to know the water. You're going to know the sky, the clouds, everything, even the human being. And the human beings also have something to tell about, and that's all the animals. The human beings are the only ones that could tell you how we live with the animals. The grizzly bear studies. We lived with the grizzly bears for years and years and years. We had no study, but we existed. Sometimes they might make war on us, we make war on them, but we're still living side by side. 2 nights ago, I had a visitor to my camp, a grizzly bear. He didn't do us no harm. But another person come over and say, you respect the grizzly bear, they respect you. And I said, bullshit. I stay away from that grizzly bear. But just to mention this, we have had no studies. And today, as we speak, there's a big controversy down there before the House that's being decided on for us. They have never ever come to us to talk to all of our elders, our religious peoples, and our young people in how they want to decide about their areas. That's theirs through inheritance. With treaty with the United States of America, one of the most powerful countries in the world. We stand side by America with treaties. When I went to Geneva last month, to the United Nations, to the Indigenous Peoples Working Group, I had to present myself not as a member of the Indigenous Peoples Working Group, but as an ambassador from my nation, as an observant government, to observe the United States and Canada and the other observant governments in their working relationship with the Indigenous Peoples Working Group. How are they working together on this real extreme statement concerning self-determination and self-government? In that same reflection back to environment, the animals also have self-determination. There's a category, the ones that we use for food, the ones that we use for our medicine. Every animal has its place with our people, all the native tribes in America. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have to convince the United States through the Religious Freedom Act that we need protection. When it comes to the Blackfoot people on the Badger, we have other people determining our protection, but we have no protection. There's a few people in our land that did not assimilate. And those people are the people that are going to teach the world how to save this earth. Everyone else lost that. But there's a pocket full of people that still have that ancient knowledge that cannot be translated into Western philosophy. Western philosophy does not accommodate that ancient philosophy. We can only speak it in our ancient images, our ancient knowledges. But we're lucky today. We're lucky that I have a mission to my people to explain these ancient knowledges so I could help my people, so they could understand that they still have something left. But above everything else, we have pure water. And this battle that I'm in, my people, my friends from my tribe, we're willing to work with all the networks in America, the environmental networks. But they have to realize that we have something to teach them, and it has not been interpreted yet. Once that interpretation is made, then you'll see the difference from the ancient knowledges and the Western knowledge. We're lucky that we still have people in America, in all the tribes, that we have pockets of people that still speak their native tongue. And all the environmental concerns, all the wilderness concerns, all the humanities, human rights, civil rights, being human being, it's all wrapped up in those people's language, ready to be interpreted into Western language. Sometimes people say, what side of you is Blackfoot? What side of you is Western? I don't know. One day it's Western, the other day it's Blackfoot. It comes and it goes. Sometimes we become very depressed because you got these two cultures bumping heads. We have to learn to live with this conflict. And now we look around us, because of our concern for environment, we're starting to get those titles that people put on you for different kinds of reasons. And my reason for being called who I am today, I'm the noble green savage. You know, I thought I was more than just a noble green savage. But I'm real happy that now I look around my people and everyone is concerned about our environment, about cleaning up our own house, about teaching the world how we could save our environment. We have people that we have to educate in our own communities that have assimilated so much into Western society that they forgot about these knowledges over here, but they're not lost. It's still in their family. Even if they don't realize it, they still have it in here. So when we come to these kinds of things, people look at us and they say, well, here's this man must know a lot about environment, about the animals. Yes, we do. My knowledge comes about by the people that taught me, my grandparents and other elders. Even other people that are younger than me taught me something about my environment, something that I could not see, that they saw. So when I took this authorship in this society, it wasn't just for a fad or a clique or whatever you call it. No, this was very serious. So my job now, I have to look and see to confirm the next person that's going to take that responsibility. I have to look through my whole tribe to make sure that I make a good selection. It goes for all of our religious leaders and all of our cultural activities. My trip here today, I had a visitor come to my teepee. I still have a teepee on Badger Creek. My family, we still drink the water. We're trying to use up all the summer. It's coming to an end. We have to move back into a house. But we enjoyed this whole summer along this river. So we're one of the few families that still live on the Badger. We still drink the water. We still hunt in that area. And we use it for our sacred practices. We've been so stingy, so restricted with our religion, our culture, that we allowed no one else to come in to observe it. Only us. Very restricted. It can't be no other way. Whenever we disappear as Blackfoot people in our ceremonies, our way of life, that's it. There is no more Blackfoot culture. We are facing, it's true, we are facing extinction. We are facing this endangered peoples, they call us. Our culture, our language, it's disappearing because of all of this this other influence that was thrown in our lap. And we're so naive about these kinds of things, we just do it. So now we have a big job. We have more problems now. We have to educate our young people about all these new things that are falling into our lap. Are they good for us or are they bad for us? So being here today is to remind the people that have become educated in that way to remember that they still have an indigenous spirit that's saying, wait a minute, don't move so fast. Don't leave me back here. Don't leave me alone. Take me with you wherever you go. Don't ever abandon me. That's that voice that's calling us from behind. Not to ever forsake that indigenous person, that ancient person, long time ago people. We consider ourselves a Stone Age people living into the 20th century. But I have to remind you, we're a very sophisticated Stone Age people. On one side you see civilization. They have knives. Those knives become dull. Well, the knives from our Stone Age civilization never get dull. They're flint. They last forever. Their sharpness stays forever. They never get dull. They never wore out. If you go dig sites, I'm not telling you to do it, but you would find some of these knives. And they're still as sharp as the time they were used back in the pre-Columbian times. We talk about civilization. Is it civilized? Is it to be civilized to tear a fetus from the mother's womb? Is that civilized? What do we consider civilized? I consider being civilized to live in a teepee and all the designs on the wall and stays in 100 mile an hour wind, it won't blow over. Very civilized. Very uniquely put together. It will never ever, if we needed to move in a hurry, we could move it. If we needed to clean house, we could move it. We could look for cleaner grass, move to that patch of grass, then let that grass grow back to its natural state. We know where we camp. Every family in our nation, they have a campfire. When they go into the mountains, they know their special place that they need to go to make a fire, and so they could share that fire with their grandparents and relatives that aren't here anymore. When we make that fire in those special places, everything comes back. We're strong again. We're reminded to continue that place for as long as we live, as long as we exist. When we get old, then our children take on that responsibility. They know those specific campfires. That's what the Forest Service wants us to do, to say, you have to tell us what tree, which rock. We can't do that. It's against Blackfoot law for us to give away those knowledges. I can't say, my friend here goes to that mountain, this is what they do. No, that's wrong. I could never ever give these secrets up. So my fight on the badger, I could say today, many of my people now respect the fact that I stood up. I was the first to openly battle the United States Forest Service. A lot of my people now respect me because I stood up. The biggest sin would be to do nothing. So now, because of all of this that has happened, we have to remain that unique pocket of pre-Columbian culture. Whenever the United States decides to put any kind of protection for us, then they will come and ask us, how do we protect you? But no one else could decide my protection, how I need to be protected in those few people that's left in the Blackfoot. nation. But we have a lot of support now. Most of our people now are realizing who they are, what they own, and what they want to keep. That's up to us. Our treaties, 1895, 96, right now those treaties should be the thing that's on the table before the House. When they determine this wilderness, this designation for wilderness, they have to consider, what do the Blackfeet have? We have a lot to protect. When they start talking about protection in the Sweetgrass Hills, in the Leech Mining, those people that were doing the EIS never came to the Blackfeet people to ask us how we fit into that picture. That's one of our places that we've, in our stories, that's one of, away from these mountains, that was one of the places that we have a lot of cultural significance. My direct grandfather was in a battle right there. There's a song in our tribe about that chief that was killed. There's a lot of cultural significance there. Not to mention going down towards Billings. There's areas there that we still have that we consider very, very special to us. But we don't tell the world about our secrets. But today, because of the EIS that was put together by the Forest Service, it forced the Blackfeet people to define Blackfoot Indian. When we defined Blackfoot Indian, it put 3/4 of our tribe in danger because of that definition. And they knew that they were doing this. They knew that they were weakening our stronghold by making us define Blackfoot Indian. The last time a tribe has ever defined their native being, there was 8,000 of those people, 8,000. When they got through with that definition, there was only 1,100 that could call themselves a Uinta or a Ute. And that was all over the Colorados. After they paid them off, they terminated them. They had a big war between the Ute-speaking Utes and the assimilated Utes. After years later, the ones that were terminated start to come back. They had nowhere to go. The punishment for those people, those chiefs and elders, was to look at their own sisters, their own nieces, their own daughters, sitting alongside of the road on their luggage with nowhere to go. And if they ever do that to our people, this is going to be our punishment. We're going to look at our daughters, our sisters, and all of our young people sitting alongside of the road on their luggage with nowhere to go. A lot of Indian people make it in the cities. They make, but not all of them. They die. We were never made slaves. If we were ever made slaves and they put us in those slave camps or whatever, we wouldn't live very long. We choose to die. We're like the animal. You take a wild animal and try to make him a domestic animal, he's going to die. Maybe one or two will survive. We have our place in this world, in the environment. And these people that are talking wilderness environment, they have to come back to the natives of this land, back to Aboriginal North America, to those native speaking communities, and get a proper translation on what they want and the kind of protection that they need. And that's where it's at. It's very sad that we have to be in that situation. But I look around me, I have people from Europe, people from all over the world that are thinking now, what could I do to save this earth? What could I do to contribute to protecting what we have left, to heal in this earth. Well, they could learn from us native peoples in how to heal ourselves, other than the pharmaceutical medicines. How could we heal the earth? So I just want to give you a little bit of my battle. I have a victory. I don't have as many people opposing me. They all know that this earth is in danger. They have to agree that we all need fresh air, pure water, and a good place to live, to let our children to grow into those human beings that they were meant to grow into. You have children. If we're affected, you're affected. If you're affected, those people are affected. So that's where it's at today, and we're waiting right now to see how this vote is going to turn out in the House. Our concern is the Blackfoot area. We're wondering, we throw it around. We're just now learning these new words on wilderness, environment. Those words never existed before. Now we're thinking, well, what is wilderness? What is environment? We have to find new words in our language to say wilderness, to say environment, to say satellite, to say computer. We have those words. We could say in our language, we could say anything we want to say. We have a very sophisticated language, among other tribes as well. We could communicate. So when we say wilderness, when you hear wilderness, to you it means maybe a bill to protect this land, keep it pristine, keep it untouched. When we talk about wilderness, to us it means something else. They put me back in loincloths, put feathers in my hair, and push me back there to live like 200-300 years ago again. To us that would be wilderness. But we have to think about today. We still do those things, only thing we dress different. We still hunt. We still use that elk meat, the hides, everything like we used 300 years ago. The only thing that has changed was the time. I brought with me some of my smoked elk meat just to let people see where this comes out of the badger. This is our food. It's our delicacy. We don't eat dry meat all the time. No, these are delicacies. These are times we get together and we share with our friends, our relatives. But wilderness is one thing that we have to, on our part, we haven't translated yet. Environment, we haven't translated yet. When we give a translation, it will be the Blackfoot understanding of wilderness and environment. So thank you for giving me this time, and it's good to be here.
Thank you, Tiny Man. Next person is Nicole Price, who's going to talk about the struggle they're currently undergoing over the medicine wheel and maybe some related issues. I know that she is allied with Bill Tolbull, who's here, who has delivered lectures before on the medicine wheel and the protection that's going on. Just one added thing what Tiny Man was talking about, he was talking about our relationship with the bears, and looking back there seeing Lance Olson just reminded me of something I seen in the paper today or yesterday about a grizzly bear that had been destroyed because they had become, what they say, habituated. Habituated, strange word, meaning that it goes back to something it likes, mainly a trash can or food left out by humans. But the bear was destroyed. Several bears were destroyed this past summer because they had become habituated to human food. They've lost their fear of humans. So if that bear's action is detrimental to human society, and if what the scientists are saying concerning the destruction of the ozone, then every one of us who drove here in cars today have become habituated and should be destroyed. Is that not true? Nicole?
Can everybody hear me if I talk loud from sitting down? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. I'm new to this. Normally Mr. Tallbull speaks and I get to sit in the back, but Bill just had quadruple bypass surgery a month ago, and so he wasn't really feeling up to it, and we weren't so sure he could make it, so I get to do the honors. I do feel very honored to sit with this group of people. I've known most of them within the last 4 years that we've had the Alliance going. I am the coordinator. I am non-Indian. I get to work with 5 traditional elders, or elders of their tribes. I feel very fortunate with that. They've taught me a lot. They are Bill, who is over there in the corner. Bill, would you stand up so people know where you are? If you have any questions or any that I can't answer, I'm going to let Bill do that. The other fellows I work with are John Hill Sr. from the Crow Tribe, Philip Underbaggage from Pine Ridge Sioux, Floyd Youngman from the Fort Peck Sioux, and Heyman Wise from the Shoshone Tribe. At the present, those are the men members of our board. I do have 3 women, 2 who are HELP founding members, and another lady, and they are white ladies, and they get to do the work. The Medicine Wheel Alliance was started 4.5 years ago with three people, which was Bill Lyon and Lisa Ellis. We've grown to have a membership of almost 100 people. We are incorporated, we have our own nonprofit number, and we have tried to go out and make a difference in sacred land issues and environmental areas that are concerns to Native Americans. We do not represent tribes. We do not feel that we can do that. We feel that that takes a power of attorney from a tribe to get that, so that we could say we represent them. We do not feel any tribe should have to do that. We do try to work as a liaison between tribes and federal agencies, tribes and traditional communities, so that they have the information they need to make really good decisions on sacred land issues or any other environmental issues. I came by my career in a rather strange way. I was picked by Mr. Tallbull at one point in time to help him do some timber sales. At that point in time, I knew absolutely nothing about being a grassroots organizer or even an activist for that matter. I've had to learn an awful lot, and I've had a lot of good people who have helped me. Bob Yetter from the Badger 2 Medicine, people from the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, Louisa Wilcox from Greater Yellowstone, and Betsy from the Sierra Club in Sheridan have all been excellent help for me. I'm going to try to read this because I had to hurry make my notes on all of this. I would like to give you an update of what's taking place at the Medicine Wheel in the last year. We ended up with the draft EIS last fall, the comment period at the end of November. We turned in 1,800 petition signatures, a lot of comments. The Forest Service has got a stack this tall. 80% were for just closing down the Medicine Wheel area, not doing any tourist development, turning it back to the Indians, and the Forest Service to this date has done nothing else. We are getting no direction from them at this point in time that there will be a final environmental impact statement out. They are not doing a programmatic agreement that we have tried to push them into. We see absolutely nothing taking place except that we have had a change of the Forest Service district ranger and the forest supervisor on the Bighorn. The one thing they have done is proposed a timber sale right outside the 2.5-mile boundary that we consider temporary at this point until an ethnographic study is finished. That came up this summer, and it's for 750,000 board feet on 150 acres around the Porcupine campground. We have challenged them on the sale for the simple reason that the men who have been going in to put vision questers on the mountain have had to stay in that campground, and so they have established their own relationship with the campground and the area around it. It has sent the Forest Service back to their desks for an extra time. They told us when the scoping comments were done that there would be 30 days and the decision notice would be out. They're still working on this one. And we did address a lot of other environmental issues because they do have some water in there and some nice riparian areas. But, for us, the spiritual management of the place was the most important, and we are challenging them on those grounds. In the board meeting that we had this summer, the board proposed that we go to the Crow tribe, who has treaty rights on the area, and ask if they would not work with us, with our board, to see if we can't 638 contract the mountain and the Medicine Wheel and some of the surrounding area, and at least push the Forest Service into some other area instead of just putting us all on hold. That's a whole learning process for me because I've not ever been involved in any of that kind of thing, and we're finding out it's going to be a long process. But it's something that we felt needed to be done. We felt that this just putting us on hold, we've been at this almost 5 years, another 5 is a long way down the road. We realize there's legislation of which Karen will address, but the thing is, in the interim, what we see taking place here is we probably will see an EA out on the information center and snowmobile warming hut that they want to place up at the mountain sometime yet this fall. They had interpreters up there this summer. We ended up with one fellow from the Park Service, another fellow who was white, who could tell about the traditional concerns and multiple use. I don't see anything changing here. It's just like we're going along this little track, and even if the legislation comes up and can get passed, we're still going to spend at least, I would imagine, a year or more into policy and regulation before the Forest Service will maybe say that they now understand what they're supposed to do. And in the interim, who knows? I really feel that the forest supervisor who's come on board, he has flat out told us he does not have to abide by the historic preservation what he wants. He has said that there's enough wilderness in the Bighorns, and so timbering can take place. They have been challenged on their ASQ by the Sierra Club, and yet we are still seeing them looking at timber sales. They're still looking at the timber on the mountain. So I just don't see anything different taking place here, and I must admit I'm feeling very frustrated, but somewhere along the line something has to give, and so if we just keep their toes to the fire, maybe eventually it'll affect them somehow and we'll see some changes made. We were told in a meeting that we have been trying to get them to give us consulting party status. They gave another group called the Medicine Wheel Coalition for Sacred Sites of North America consulting status to a programmatic agreement. So we submitted our own letter asking for the same status, considering our group was the first group that ever dealt with the Bighorn on this issue. And to date they have refused because our bylaws say we don't represent tribes. We have done a lot of back and forth on that between the Bighorn, the Advisory Council, and our group, but that's still where we are today. The one thing that did take place last fall, we worked with the Sierra Club towards the end of the comment period to put together a management plan that we thought that people could live with for the Medicine Wheel and the mountain. And when we submitted it, we felt it was a very good one. We looked at them closing the road up to the wheel and that 1.5 mile walk from the radar junction that they would walk in, people would walk in, but there would be Native American interpreters and guides and guards or whatever you need to be up there for people. We just didn't want any other action taking place within that 2.5 miles. We, went along with the cattle grazing that now takes place around the edges. I thought there were some really good things in there. We have never heard from the Forest Service on that plan at all, period. We've not gotten a comment, we've not gotten a letter back, we've gotten no invitation to come in and sit and talk about it. Absolutely nothing. So if anybody's got any helpful hints on how you push them off in a different direction, I'd be willing to listen. One of the things that I have learned, I have a position, because I am white and I work with an Indian board, the reason I have this position is because the men that I deal with feel that you do not debate a religious issue, and to them when you get into sacred lands, the sacred lands area, then they are put into a debating situation that is very uncomfortable for them. And so, in that respect, they let me be the debater. And it's been interesting because I see the reactions of the dominant society towards our group. I see Indian reactions towards our group. It's been a colorful area, to say the least. I feel the area that I deal in is very complex and having to do with federal agencies which have no cultural direction other than federal regulation, Indian tribes which have both a tribal government, which is what federal agencies say they will recognize, and then a traditional community which may or may not have a working relationship with the tribal government, but which does not let the federal agencies off the hook. Under the Historic Preservation Act, there is a section 106 and 110 which states to a federal agency that they are to consult with traditional. It is what goes on after we have long gone. It is the one thing that has not been maintained by the peoples who invaded this land. I will not blame them for the people who came here, because I already feel they lost touch with their own spiritual nature before they came. But, and I say but, there was a group of people here, they're Native Americans, who have tried to maintain a spiritual harmony with Mother Earth and all of its beings. Today we must all work to help them maintain this harmony and not lose our own sense of belonging. I do have some ways that I would like to project that I think our environmental groups could help. To Native Americans, helping them when asked to monitor projects on their own homelands. They are subjected to an agency, and that's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which we have found to be even more out of touch with Native values than most other federal agencies. Traditional communities or just concerned peoples within the tribe may need your help in assessing documents of either an environmental assessment or an EIS, and in all manner of projects. I think most of the tribes are dealing with mining, timbering, railroads, of all kinds in the state right now. Most tribes within the tribal government don't have the people who can really address these issues, and they must rely on the BIA, who within their own agency is economically driven, and like the rest, still wants that to take place. Make yourselves available to them. And two, when you've given them the information that they need, then you let them make the decision that is best for them, not for us. You can't hear? Okay. How am I going to do this and read too? Their reasons may be based on tradition and culture, which is totally alien to us, and we must honor that. 3, if land is given back by treaty rights or for any other reason, we must support that. I have 2 different groups, both the Crow and the Sioux and Pine Ridge, who are looking to get lands back for very different reasons. The Pine Ridge Sioux are looking into all lands that the Forest Service and BLM consider excess lands. that they are trying to now go back and get through treaty rights to add to their reservations for their own people. The Crow are going after some lands because of the 103rd Meridian that was illegally surveyed, and they are going back and getting some federal and federal lands that they will take back. What they do with those, I don't think is our place to interfere with that. They have a way of maintaining the land, and they did it for many thousands of years. And the one area that they all, I think, address, and I think you're going to hear it from all of these people, is that they need to maintain spiritual harmony with the land. This morning we were asked, I think it was by John Craighead, how many of us thought people should be in the wilderness areas and how many shouldn't. I think if areas are set aside by tribes, we do not have the right to request going into those areas, and that's my own thoughts. I have learned in dealing with these people that they have their rights, and I'll be very frank with you. I spent some time at the medicine wheel before I ever met Bill, and I spend less and less time there for the simple reason that I have learned from these men that I do not need to go there to be part of that place. I also had to look at it from the fact that I am working to help them preserve something that's very unique and important to them. And if someday down the road they tell me that that land is strictly off limits to me and everyone else, I will have to honor that. I had to really seriously think about that because it is a very special place for me also. But I feel the values, the honoring that they will do of that place will outweigh any of my being there, and I have learned that I can be there without being there. I think we all need to seriously think about that. We were working on the Black Elk Wilderness in South Dakota. They get 72,000 people through the Black Elk Wilderness per day. That's a wilderness area, not a traffic pattern. And that's exactly what I think we do sometimes when we look at these areas. We all love them to death. The other thing I'd like to address, and I may be stepping on some toes here, Bill and I have attended many conferences. I've listened to Bill talk at numerous conferences of all different kinds. I've listened to panels like these people here speak. The thing is, when we go home, we never hear from you again. And we don't till the next time they need somebody else to come in and speak at another conference. You either need to quit asking us to come, or you need to start helping when they need help. They do have concerns. And they're the same concerns you have. They have learned that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act does not mean a lot. So they're having to go back and deal with the same laws that you do. You know, NEPA, clean water, clean air, the whole bit. And they need help in those areas. Basically, there's not a lot of people who can help them assess documents, and they need that help. I would like to see the different organizations go out and take a tribe per organization and really say, how can we help you? Not what you can do for them, but what they can, how you can help them. I think they would tell you. I think they will, ask you for what they need and information. You can tell them that. What I have seen taking place on some of the reservations is you end up with people on their tribal councils who really do not understand English. They still speak their own languages. You have someone go in and tell them that this document is wonderful, that everything we say is fine, you just trust us. And that document could be a piece of junk, but they don't know the difference. And they need to know that there is somebody out there who can go and help them if they need help. We have a whole room of people. I've listened to all kinds of wonderful suggestions and people commenting today. If you really want to help, that's what you need to do. Don't just ask them to come in and speak at a conference and then tomorrow say, that was really wonderful and we really enjoyed that, and that's it. They still have the same concerns. They still want clean water. They still want clean air. Floyd was just talking about the things that are really important, and they're no different than your concerns. But they need help within their own homelands, too, to do those things. Sacred lands are being affected every day. I see timber sales on them, I see oil and gas development on them, I see tourist development on them. Mining, it's happening out there, folks, and there's a whole lot of it out there. And they need your help. The thing I see taking place here is if you don't help them, then they lose the places that are really, truly important to them, and then we have taken away their culture. Because they need those land spaces to be able to go back to. So there's almost a double-edged sword here. If they lose it, we have to be able to somehow maintain for them some places. And the thing I've learned too is that they do maintain harmony with the land. They really do go out and be part of the spiritual nature of the land and communicate with them. And that's the part that we need to really understand better for ourselves. I don't think you need to go. I've gotten into this whole thing about, we have to go and find the Indian person who's going to tell us how we're going to save ourselves. All you need to do is go outside and sit. If you're really sincere, those spirits will come and they will talk to you and they will tell you how you can help. If all this group went out and just sat and communed with the spirits that are up above, like Indian people have done for thousands of years, you might be absolutely amazed at what you could do. I really feel that. I really have come to believe that. Because no matter how much scientific information you have, somebody can juggle that. But when you take it directly where it's supposed to go, there is no juggling. Those people do what they want to see done. And it's just a matter of us saying, hey, you're up there and we need your help. Somebody in here was asking how we started, and I said, well, it was kind of it's a rather interesting story, but I said one of the things where we started on a shoestring. And it would get to the point where, the phone bill had showed up and there wasn't any money to pay the phone bill, and it was getting kind of desperate, and now what are we going to do? And I would go and sit at the base of the mountain, and I would just flat out say, hey, the phone bill's here. If you want us to keep up our work, you have got to help. It's those greenbacks, not trees, greenbacks that make the difference in our land. And if you want us to help, that's what has to come. And I could go home and the next day in my mail would be money to pay the phone bill. That's how we learned to do our work the first couple of years. So I know it can help. I know it makes a difference. The other part I'd really like to get into, and I think we've created a conflict here, is when we keep asking for the spiritual leader within the tribe. That's kind of going back to the same thing and sending me your chief. I think we have put these people in a bind by requesting that kind of presence. They have their spiritual leaders, they have their traditional people, they have their religious people. You can name all kinds of people. But when we start asking them to bring the one, because we don't want to deal with somebody second rate, then we're putting those people into conflict within their tribes, because that may not be an appropriate action for them, or we're putting someone forward. They're having to find someone to put forward, and that may not be a comfortable place for anyone who's within the traditional community. The other thing I find is there's a lot of definitions of traditional, and I have trouble with all of those definitions. There are traditional people who absolutely live a traditional way. There are people who would consider themselves traditional, who can get out and speak and still live that way. There are people who would not consider themselves traditional and yet really believe in the culture and preservation of their people. And I think all of those people care. And so when we start classifying again, I don't think that's a very comfortable place. Those are some things I wanted to say. I talked to Dan and I said, well, please let me have my 20 minutes up here and see what I can cover. But I'd be willing to talk with somebody afterwards. If you have some questions for Bill, I'm sure he would be more than willing to answer those. I have been very fortunate in being able to work with these people. The other thing I will say to you is if you're going out there to help the Native American people so that you can become more Indian, don't do it. If you're going to go out there and offer your help because they are a people with the same concerns you have, then do it. Thank you.
One of the things that, Nicole's talking about, I guess a lot of you, me trying to act as a catalyst, somebody who can synthesize some of this information, would be to seriously read Wendell Berry. Some of the things he talks about, land. Because that's what has happened to us through the process of assimilation, the forced acculturation. We were divorced from our ways, forcefully. And he talks about how when people become divorced from the land, you start divorcing yourself from the animals of the land. And ultimately, it shows up in the statistics that we're faced with today, where more than 50% of all the people who are going to get married today are going to divorce. Because we don't have that relationship, that spiritual relationship with that person that we're supposed to have. That starts with the land. We're talking about teepees. Tiny Man was talking about teepees. I had a Crow man come to my lodge in Browning during the annual powwow, and he was talking about the meaning of each one of the poles in the Crow way. Every one of those poles has a meaning. And he said, we have three mothers. We have our biological mother, we have this lodge, which is our mother, and we have the Mother Earth. Everybody has three mothers. So some of the things, this is very hard to take an issue that we're talking about here, sacred lands. And the last time when Bill was here, 2 or 3 years ago, talking, somebody asked him from the audience, what can we do? And we need help. The Native people need help in protecting their sacred lands. But I also said, it is time for the non-Indian to start developing your own sacred places, your own traditions here. Because you live here. You're beginning to see it now with the 3rd and 4th generations right here in the Bitterroot Valley. They're talking about the Californians with all their money coming in. Californication, they call it. And something that's kind of perverse in us natives, we say, yeah, now you know what it feels like. The old Bob Dylan song, how does it feel? But it's happening. So we have some new natives who are beginning to feel this crunch of outside people. And beginning to see that a lot of times the things that you hold sacred, the things that you respect, are not respected by the people who are coming in. The next person I'll have talk is Karen Atkinson, who's tribal attorney for the Flathead Salish and Kootenai tribal body.
Try and sit also, and if you can't hear, let me know, and I don't know if my voice can carry that well, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be here today and to share with you some work that I'm doing on behalf of the Salish and Kootenai tribes. I represent the tribes in a national legislative effort to amend the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which was passed by Congress in 1978 to protect Native American religious practices. There has been a long history of religious discrimination against Native Americans. This act, when it was passed in 1978, was viewed as a way to reverse some of that. However, in recent years, with 2 Supreme Court decisions, there's been a renewal of this type of religious discrimination against the Native people of this land. These 2 Supreme Court decisions establish a real dramatic retreat from First Amendment religious protections, not only to Native Americans, but to all religious peoples and all minority religions, primarily, who are not in the mainstream. For Indian people, these Supreme Court decisions could have devastating effects, because as you've heard from Tiny Man, that Indian culture and Indian religion are inseparable. To destroy someone's religion is really destroying a lifestyle and a cultural way of being. For many Indian people, their religion pervades all aspects of their life. It's not something that they go to once a week on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday morning. It's something that they practice every day. For many Indian people, their religion has an aspect that is intertwined with the land, and the land has special meaning to them. These are called sometimes sacred sites, or they're just special places that tribes have always gone to. Is she okay? A lot of places that are special, we call in legal terms as sacred sites. I know a lot of Native people aren't really comfortable with that, but as Native people have been struggling to protect these sites, we've had to come up with different definitions and ways that we as lawyers can talk about these with federal agencies and with the courts and with other people. A lot of times these sites are special because of the landscape that is there, because of the natural formations. Sometimes these sites are special because they denote a certain place that has been mentioned in coyote legends for tribes. And sometimes special events have taken place there, and each year or periodically tribes will come back and conduct a ceremony and renew whatever event happened there, and kind of keep the power of that place going, and to leave offerings, and to make sure that that place will always be there for themselves and also future generations. There has been, unlike any other minority group or religious group in the United States, there has not been, I think, any other religious group that has been subject to systematic religious suppression by the U.S. government. A cornerstone of federal policy in colonizing the United States had been to break down Native religions, to break down Native cultures, and to assimilate Indians into the dominant society. This sort of religious discrimination essentially defined the relationship of the colonists with the Native peoples they found here. 500 years ago, when Columbus first stepped on, I think it was his first day in the Western Hemisphere, when he was later writing in his journals about the Native peoples that he found and that greeted him and welcomed him, he said of them, "I believe that they would easily be made Christians, because it seemed to me that they have no religion." I think this really demonstrates the perception that the Europeans had of Indian religions. I think because they did not understand the Native religions, they did not understand that their type of worship was deeply intertwined with the natural world, with the animals, with plants, with the land. They viewed these as pagan rites, and because of that, they were inferior, and because of that, they had a right to Christianize them and to bring them, I guess, within their religious ideals. This is, I think, very ironic, looking at the religious persecution that the colonists were fleeing from Europe. And it was this type of persecution that they themselves had been subject to in Europe, and because of that, had built the foundation of the United States when it developed the Constitution, the First Amendment, was of great importance to them. You know, that in the First Amendment they established that all Americans would be guaranteed the rights to exercise their religion and to be able to worship without governmental interference. The First Amendment, though, has never been fairly applied to Native Americans. And in fact, this sort of federal policy to Christianize Native Americans was the cornerstone of federal policy, and you can still see that today with the Supreme Court decisions, that has not changed. The federal government, when it first came onto reservations, oftentimes it appointed missionaries to be the government agent of that whole reservation. The whole job of the missionaries were to strip Indians of their native culture, to take Indian children away from their homes, to put them into boarding schools where they would be punished if they spoke their native tongues. In the 1890s, the federal policy took a very dark turn. At that time, federal troops were used to stamp out the ghost dance and Wounded Knee. U.S. Marshals were sent in and literally slaughtered the native people there, the Sioux people there that were practicing the ghost dance religion. Not long after that, the federal government passed regulations that were on the books until 1934 that prohibited the sun dance, it prohibited the use of medicine men and going to a medicine man for healing. These regulations stayed on the books until 1934. Really wasn't until 1978, when Congress passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, that we saw a significant reversal of this federal policy. At that time, Congress passed a federal law which established the policy to protect and to preserve Native religions. Also included in the act was to guarantee access to sacred sites. In the 14 years, however, since this act has been on the books, it has failed in its in being carried out by federal land managers and by the federal courts, who are charged to safeguard and to see that federal laws are carried out. The federal land managers have been very inconsistent, I think, in applying the act. The courts have told Native people when they have gone to court to prevent oil and gas development on a sacred site, to prevent timber sales, or to prevent roads from going through sacred areas. The courts have either been unwilling or unable to protect these Native religious values. What the courts have said was that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act has no teeth. And what that means is that when Congress passed the act, there was no legal mechanism to enforce it. So basically, it was just a policy. To many Indian people, it really hasn't been worth the paper that it's written on, because that's all that it is basically written paper. Native Americans have always thought that even if the American Indian Religious Freedom Act did not protect their religious practices, that the First Amendment did. And it wasn't until 1988, when the first of the two Supreme Court decisions was decided, that Native Americans found out that the First Amendment may not also provide them protection. In 1988, 3 tribes, Northern California tribes, objected to the building of a Forest Service road in an area called Chimney Rock area, Northern California. And it was an area that was located on public lands within one of the national forests, and an area that all 3 tribes had gone to for centuries and conducted certain religious practices and certain ceremonies. The Forest Service hired a consultant to do a cultural survey and to determine whether or not, in fact, this site was a sacred site. And the Forest Service in the court case, their own experts in about 100 pages of written documentation did agree with the Indian people who had said that this is a sacred area, agreed that this was a sacred area, and that for the Forest Service to build a road in this particular area would virtually destroy those tribes' ability to practice their religion. And the conclusion wasn't that it would destroy their ability to practice one ceremony, but their entire religious practice, because this site was such an important site to these three tribes. It was a major, I guess you could equate it to a major shrine to other religions, that it was so central to their religion that to take it away would mean that they could not practice their religion any longer. The U.S. Supreme Court, in this decision, even with the Forest Service own expert, narrowly interpreted the First Amendment and the Free Exercise Clause and found that neither the American Indian Religious Freedom Act nor the First Amendment protected the native sacred site there. It basically said this is federal lands, a federal land manager. It's basically an internal management decision. They can do whatever they want to do with their federal property. And it almost equated a First Amendment right to a choice of what color should I buy a file cabinet today. I mean, it was just such a crazy sort of analogy that the court used, by basically saying we can't allow Indian people to tell the federal government what to do with its own property. The result of this decision, I think, has caused great alarm for many Native American people, and especially in view of the fact that sacred sites are not something that, if they're destroyed, an Indian tribe or a traditional person can simply go find another place and conduct a ceremony. For many reasons, these sites are often chosen for them as part of their religion, that they're directed to certain sites, and because they hold special significance or special powers, that's the reason a site is special. It's not just because it's a beautiful location and you can go find another beautiful location that has the same sort of qualities. So to Indian people, to destroy a sacred site is not the same as a church building down and then the community being able to rebuild the church. That site is gone and it's lost forever. For many Native people and Indian tribes, many of their sacred sites are already gone. They're already destroyed. For the Salish and Kootenai, their Aboriginal territory was 22 million acres. And they're now relegated to a 1.2 million acres reservation in western Montana. But their territory included at one time most of western Montana. And they have many special areas that they still go to, that they hunt at, that they fish at, that they gather medicinal plants, and where they conduct their ceremonies. Oftentimes, these sites are within public lands. And so we have two culture committees within our tribal structure that advise the tribal council on cultural and religious matters. What we're finding is a lot of their time is being spent on monitoring Forest Service projects, monitoring highway projects, so that they know when a project is scheduled in their critical areas. And so they spend a lot of time negotiating with agencies on mitigation of impacts in these special areas. When this Supreme Court decision was decided in '88, I think it really went unnoticed. The only people I think who stood up and took notice were Indian tribes and Indian communities who were affected by it. I think a lot of this has to do is that the notion or the concept of worship at a sacred site is very foreign to most people, that it is not something that is easily understood, and I think because the Native American religions in this country are the only religions that have a significant component that requires certain activities to be done at these special places, that it is really not understood either by the agencies or the courts. However, the concept of sacred sites and pilgrimages to sacred sites are not unique in world religions. Many world religions have sacred sites. The Mecca is a significant site for Muslims, and Jerusalem is a significant site for Christians and Jews. Other countries have very, very strict laws that protect the sacred sites that are in their countries. I think here, because there aren't other religions that have similar sites here within the United States, we don't see the law reflecting that sort of societal value and that sort of protection for these type of areas. I think it wasn't until 1990, when another Supreme Court decision was decided out of Oregon, that other religious communities started to stand up and take notice to what the Supreme Court was doing in the area of the First Amendment. In this decision, the Supreme Court dealt with a situation where two Native American drug counselors were fired from their jobs for ingesting peyote in a religious ceremony outside of the workplace. The two Native American counselors were fired from their jobs. They in turn applied for unemployment benefits with the state. The state denied them unemployment benefits on the basis that they were fired essentially for cause, that they were fired for legitimate reasons because they had been ingesting a drug, which under Oregon law, peyote is listed as a drug in the state of Oregon. This case went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that the Oregon law was a valid law, even though it infringed upon this particular group who belonged to the Native American Church on their rights to use peyote as a sacrament in their religious practices. It was in this case that the Supreme Court dramatically departed from its typical First Amendment analysis. And I think it really sent up a red flag to most of the religious communities within the United States. I think that what most other churches felt was, even though in this decision the group that was singled out was Native American, that the next decision could be their own religion. And what the case did was basically weaken the vitality of the First Amendment for all faiths. As a result of this second decision, two coalitions were formed to deal with these two Supreme Court decisions. The first one was a coalition of most of the major church groups within the United States, from the evangelicals all the way to the Catholic Church, joined in a political coalition that has been unprecedented to date. They have drafted a bill which would essentially reestablish the First Amendment balancing test that had occurred or that was in place before the Smith decision in Oregon was decided. This bill has been introduced in Congress and is known as the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The Native Americans, when this bill was being discussed and being drafted, approached the lobbyists for the Solars bill, as it's referred to, and were told pretty much go away. We don't want anything to do with you. You guys were the ones who essentially took the direct hits in these two Supreme Court decisions, and therefore you're too much of a political liability. We don't want to lessen the chances of our bill going through by kind of weighting it down with Native American issues. So a number of national Indian organizations joined together and formed a coalition to draft our own bill. And that's essentially what we have done. We have spent about 2 years now drafting federal legislation which would address 4 different areas. The first area is that it will provide protections to sacred lands on federal lands, and also when federally assisted undertaking occurs. The second thing it does is that it extends the First Amendment protections to Native American practitioners who use peyote in religious practices. And third, it provides, takes a look at Native American Indian prisoners' issues as far as it relates to religious practices within the prisons. The fourth thing that the bill does is that it provides easier access to eagle feathers for religious purposes. Similar bills in the past, in the last two Congresses, since the Ling decision in '88, there have been a number of sacred sites bills that have been introduced in Congress. These bills have not gotten anywhere. There's been a lot of fierce opposition to the bills from the federal land managers themselves. I think both the bills in the past two Congresses have been managed to be killed, basically because the federal land managers, the National Park Service, BLM, the Forest Service, have all come in basically stating, ARFA's on the books, we don't need another policy to tell us what to do. We can continue to work with Native American people to protect these sites. But the history has shown, and through the litigation that has gone on, even prior to the Ling decision, is that federal land managers have not been sympathetic to protecting these type of values. I think Tiny Man has talked a little bit about a lot of the problems that Native people face when trying to document a site or even work with the land managers on determining that there is something here that's worthy of protection. They've been, the history has shown that they have been unwilling or either unable to do that. Because of the fierce opposition that the similar sacred sites bills have had in the past, the Native Coalition that has been formed to draft amendments to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act is creating and has created a very broad base of support for these amendments. We have reached out into the environmental community and into the church community and into the human rights community to support the legislation. At this point, we have about 30 national organizations who are active members of the coalition, who are involved in helping us define the legislative strategy for getting these amendments through the Congress, and in the lobby efforts and the public education efforts that need to go forward. In November of last year, we held a roundtable discussion in Washington, D.C. with a number of the national environmental organizations. And at that time, we presented to them, I think specifically we focused on the sacred lands portion of the bill, talked about the Native concerns with the lack of protection and the record of federal administrative agencies in their inability to protect these sites, and the court's new decision basically saying that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act has no teeth, and the First Amendment also may not provide you the protection that you're looking for. It was a 2-day meeting that we held with the environmental groups, and it was very, very successful. And I think one of the reasons that it was successful is that going in, we had a very, very clear idea of what role we would play and what we were asking the environmental groups as far as their assistance in helping our effort. As a result, I think 5 of the groups have joined the coalition and who are active members of the coalition, where they're actually helping us with the lobbying and helping us draft the legislation. The groups that have joined are the Friends of the Earth, the Natural Resource Defense Council, Sierra Club, and the Wilderness Society. There were a couple areas, I think, where we were a little bit in not disagreement, but where the environmental groups had some concerns about the language that we had in the draft bill. Eagle feathers was one of those areas. In our original draft bill, I don't know if you're all familiar with the eagle permit system that exists right now, but there is a permit system that is administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which allows Native American practitioners to have access to eagle feathers and to possess eagle feathers when it's used in a religious ceremony. There's been a lot of problems throughout the years in the workings of the system. So in our bill, we tried to address that. And some of the environmental groups had some concerns about the way we addressed it and had some other suggestions that we hadn't really thought about. So we had developed a task force that would look at that issue, and it involved both some of the Native American Coalition members and some of the environmental groups. And they're now kind of working towards another way of looking at that would be acceptable to both groups. The same with the sacred sites. I don't think that there was really any concern on the substantive provisions of the sacred sites title of the bill. I think a very important part of this meeting, though, too, was a formal alliance was formed between the Indian organizations and the environmental organizations. That this was just one of the very first issues that we would tackle together and could use this as a springboard for looking at other interests that we do have in common. I think that, as other people have said earlier, that Native Americans are also concerned about the water quality, about air quality, about habitat. I think we just use different language in saying that. So I think there is a lot of common ground there, and a lot of room for us to come together and to really listen to each other's concerns and figure out a way that we can both work towards the same goal. With the environmental groups will also be helping us lobby on the Hill. We do have a Senator Inouye who is going to introduce the legislation for us, and we will be looking for co-sponsors. I think that the environmental groups here in Montana could assist us if they're interested in when it comes to that point in lobbying our own congressional delegation. That would be, I think, a key component to this legislation. And Montana is a very important state. I think there is not one tribe here in Montana that doesn't have a sacred site that is either in litigation or negotiation of some sort going on right now. Most of these are on public lands within the state of Montana. But I think the one thing that we have come to agreement on with the environmental groups is that in order for a bill of this caliber to go forward, that a good deal of what is going to happen, and a lot of what our job will be, is to educate the public. That really to look at sacred lands protection, we're going to have to change societal values in looking at how the land is viewed. To get away from looking at land just as a resource, a natural resource that's there to manage, to get away from looking at the land as something that's there to extract and to exploit. That there are other tangible or intangible and kind of intrinsic values with the land itself. So I think we have a long ways to go to reach these sort of goals, but I think that they aren't so dissimilar from what the environmental community is now doing also. And I do have about 30 handouts with me, and I'll just leave them up front for people who want them. I know, I keep waiting for him to sit on the table and dinner up here. Yeah.
Well, the legislation that Karen has referred to, is something that has been a long time coming. But I guess one of the central questions we want to ask in terms of this legislation, and especially in terms of this what we call sacred sites, it's almost becoming a buzzword today, sacred sites. And I think it's, a lot of people who get caught up in political, social, religious movements, they all develop buzzwords where everybody knows the right jargon. But what is a sacred site? Now, go back to what Connie Man was talking about in the native language. We would say, Natuitapi, holy above people, what the Christians would call angels, spiritual beings who are the Great Spirit created to help us. Because if our job here is to evolve as spiritual beings, then there are levels that we must go through. Go back to Bob Yetter, give me a piece of paper talking about Aristotle, way back then, talking about sacred sites, beings who live at these sacred sites. I know this is getting into another level than the political level we're normally dealing with here, but it's something that we feel, that is essential to an understanding. We say sacred sites. You can go among the spiritual leaders of different tribes, and they'll tell you of the experiences of men who went to sacred sites. And back home, I know an old woman who has such knowledge. And she said there are different places in the mountains you can go, and in that site there you could get a cure for heart disease. The spirit, the spiritual force that is there could give you the knowledge for heart disease. Now you go over to that mountain, and you get something for arthritis. See? Then you go over there, and there's something for diabetes. See what I mean? Sacred sites. There are different things in different sacred sites. Different gifts that can be given. But it's hard to try to convey this to a politician. It's very hard to people who have totally abrogated the teaching of their own Christ when he said, do not gather up your treasures on this earth. When Ernest Hemingway was writing his seminal work on the Spanish bullfight, he spent a lot of time among the Castilians in Spain. And he come to realize that these people, he said, when they do believe in a religion, they understand that the time they spend is very short here, and the time they're going to spend over there is very long. And these, like I say, these spiritual kind of concepts, these are the things that we work with within our culture, and it's extremely difficult to get these things across to the people who are making the laws. And that's why what Karen was talking about, they said, okay, you got a religion, you got rights, we'll make a law. And as soon as they made the law, they started breaking it. Where the thing don't, it's just it's a document without any force today. American Interreligious Freedom Act. I guess our next speaker will be Robert Gopher, Rocky Boy Organization.
Thank you. You are very kind. I know we're running over time here, but I just wanted to congratulate you for your efforts here to get together and to take your interest in the environment. First of all, I'm a Chippewa Indian, and my ancestors never accepted the fact of the gun reservation, which I don't up to this time. The reason for that is we would like to be independent like we were one time before Columbus has arrived. But I will make this very shortly, but sometimes I will have more time to talk to you. We're running over time here. What I'm saying is we are producing a film called Extinct Civilization. It will be premiered in Great Falls, Montana, October the 10th. It's concerning how we relate to each other since beginning the 500 years ago. And the film there, as being executive producer, I tried to bring across to your children, young generations, that we must live and to mediate. Where do we go from here? That's what this film is all about. And I was reading about these organizations. I will get to you the announcement of this film here. It's going to be very, very interesting to you. So I'd like to yield my short time to Joe Asher here, and but remember that we are doing something for the younger people, and that we will have a premiere of this, a new film we developed. There was one we developed called Indian Tears of Love, connected with the Pegasus mining on the Little Rocky Mountains, and that's being distributed pretty much from here to New York, from here to California, and where, I don't know, some other places. But anyway, that this film, it is very interesting. The history is our point of view from Indian people, and I think that we are in an alarming situation. We must take care of the land, so thank you.
And our last speaker is Joe Asher, as I mentioned earlier, is a part of an organization called Red Thunder Incorporated on Fort Belknap. Just to give a little negative history to the United States government, the very same trio of commissioners who treated with the Blackfeet people in 1895 for that area that is today Glacier National Park and the Badger II Medicine, the agreement of 1895, which was our last formal treaty with the United States government, those same three men who treated with us for that piece of land treated with the Grovons. And if you look at the map of the Fort Belknap Reservation, you'll see where it comes over like this, and then all of a sudden there's a jog in it, a big kind of a loop for no apparent reason, except that at that time they had already sent geologists and people in there and knew that there was the Pegasus, what is now the Pegasus gold mine. See? Like I say, some of these things for you who are dealing in wilderness, we have other historical concerns. They've taken millions and millions and millions of dollars out of that gold mine, where that little jog is in the map, and that's why that jog is in the map. So today they have that big gold mine going, and then the whole cyanide leaching process is, of course, in effect. So there are some grassroots activists, Joe and a non-Indian woman who was married to a guy from Fort Belknap, who for the past 16 years has been battling, trying to gain some attention on this particular problem. And in each of these areas, the up where we're at, Blackfeet, we're right at the Continental Divide. The streams that start there flow to the Gulf of Mexico, and they flow to the Pacific, and they flow to Hudson's Bay. And so we're asking the people who are making the policy in D.C., why are you willing to sacrifice these streams at their headwaters? If you want to allow oil and gas and timbering, then you have this National Environmental Policy Act. Why don't you enforce it at the very headwaters at least? At the very least, at the headwaters where the streams begin. Well, anyway, I'll let Joe talk about their problems down there.
I want to thank all our brothers and sisters for getting together here today, and thank the Alliance for the Wild Rockies. I'd like to thank the Alliance for the Wild Rockies for inviting us now. And I'm thankful to be here today with all the different tribes and all the rest of our brothers and sisters here. I'd like to explain a little bit about where I come from, the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. There's two tribes there, the Gros-Ventre and the Assiniboine. They were put there in the late 1800s on the reservation called Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. And it's right, it originally took in, the southern boundary took in the Little Rocky Mountains. And they're a small mountain range, about 25,000 acres. And the miners came in, I don't know when, probably around the 1900s, to look for gold. They used a pick and shovel so they didn't do too much damage to the mountains at that time. And then they evidently got all the gold they could get, the nuggets and whatnot, and then they left. Well, the mountains were supposed to be part of the reservation, but the government took them away in 1894, and they gave them back to the U.S. Forest Service. And then the Forest Service got tired of managing them, so they turned them over to the Bureau of Land Management. And then in about 1978, some prospectors came down from Canada looking around in the mountains. And then they decided to try a new process to leach the minute gold particles out of the earth, called the cyanide heap leaching process. So they started doing that in Zortman. Zortman's right in the east end, southeast end of the mountains. They had their first public hearing on it in Malta, I'm told later, which is about 50 miles north of there. And the public was pretty much enthusiastic about it, and the reservation wasn't really included in the public hearing. And we didn't really know what they were talking about, the technology of cyanide leaching. So then we didn't get involved in it. But as the years went by, we noticed that our fish were dying in the streams, and the deer were disappearing, the wildlife, the birds, the moss, the plants, the green relatives in the creeks were dying. And the trees were dying along some of the streams. So we became interested in what was killing them. And then we looked up and we seen the mine getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we thought maybe this mine is doing it. Maybe this mine's the cause of this, the killing of this wildlife and this fish. So we went to the next public hearing they had for an expansion. I think it was expansion number 10. And we listened to them, and they talked pretty good that everything was going good. They were requesting the BLM and the Montana Department of State Lands to give them a permit for expansion, number 10. So we started asking questions of the BLM and Pegasus Gold representatives there. And they told us that water ran uphill. And we became more suspicious than ever. Because one of our creek beds had dried up, and we asked them, what happened to one of our water that came down that creek? It was bad enough they killed all the trout in it, then the water disappeared. Evidently they deterred it and piped it down the other side of the mountains. So we started getting more involved with it, and then we formed the organization called Red Thunder Incorporated to deal with the issues. And some of the elders asked us to deal with the sacred sites issues, because 3 of our sacred sites has been wiped out by one of the mining on the west side of the mountains, which is called the Landusky mine. It engulfs about 2,000 acres there today, and they're asking for more expansions. And the Zortman mine on the east end engulfs about 800 acres, and they're asking for more expansions. And we've been having pretty good luck with the trying to hold them off from expansions. But they're fighting pretty hard with the news media. They buy a lot of ad time in the news media, the TV and the local radio stations and the newspaper stations. And our only weapon, I guess, is the public. To get the public more involved, we try to put everything we can in the newspapers, the ones that'll print it. And we try to make contacts with different people and different groups, environmental organizations that will help us and support us, to get the word out that there's a lot of devastation going on in the Little Rocky Mountains. And we think it's going to eventually affect our people on the reservation. Right now we're monitoring some of the heavy metals that come down caused by the mining. we are finding heavy metals showing up in the test results that are above the EPA safe standards. And right now we're helping the tribes create another committee called the Tribal Environmental Protection Committee. And I'm also on that. They appointed me on that board as well. And what we're trying to do is we're working together with just about anybody that's willing to work with us to try to get to the bottom of what's killing everything out there. The wildlife, the fish, the beaver, the moss, the grass, the trees. And we're pretty sure it's the new mining technology they're using. But we don't have the experts to prove it. We don't have the money to prove it. And it's a pretty hard struggle, you know. We've been there for, about 100 years. And we kind of like it left alone the way it was, natural, original. We don't want to see it destroyed and disturbed like that. Not to mention the destruction of our sacred sites. They're all over, scattered in those mountains. And the BLM said, well, we'll go around those if you show them to us. So we took them up and we showed it to them. Some of them. And then the archaeologist that was helping us to get them, our intention was to get them preserved under the Historic Preservation Act, like Bear Butte, South Dakota. But that didn't work out because Pegasus evidently has a lot of political pull, a lot of political clout. And they got the guy fired and transferred out of there before we could finish the study. So we just stopped right there. We didn't show any more sacred sites to anybody. Because our original intentions was to get them preserved. And it didn't work. And I guess where we are today, we're holding them off on a 25,000 acre expansion. We're requesting the BLM and the Montana Department of State Lands to have a full environmental impact statement, study and statement, before they even think about giving them an expansion. And we request to be part of that study. And we'd like a little more credibility to the Native American point of view of the sacred sites. If they're going to do a sacred site study, they should take some Native Americans and listen to them. Instead of taking archaeologists that don't know anything about Native American traditions and culture. And so far we've been slowing them up, but again, their greed for gold is really something, because they're constantly, every morning when I get up, I turn the radio on, they're on radio, local radio stations, local TV stations. In the newspapers with their propaganda. Pegasus is, an environmentalist now over there. And then they gave themselves an award for being a good neighbor to Phillips County. And it's really a struggle to survive from one day to the next. And you know that they're killing everything around there. And the funny part about it is the Bureau of Land Management and the Montana Department of State Lands backs them up and supports them, which I don't think is right. I think that they should at least remain to be neutral and listen to both sides of the story before they issue their permits. And if anybody has any questions, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.